Irish whiskey is one of the fastest growing spirits categories on the planet. New bottles hit shelves every month, and everyone from UFC fighters to multinational corporations wants a piece of the action. The problem is half the bottles in the Irish whiskey aisle charge you for everything except what matters: the whiskey inside. Celebrity faces, hexagonal bottles, castle logos, and marketing campaigns cost more than the liquid itself. You're not buying whiskey. You're buying a bottle-shaped endorsement deal wrapped in heritage storytelling and premium pricing that the actual liquid inside cannot justify. Today, we're splitting 5 Irish whiskey brands down the middle. 5 that are robbing you blind, and 5 that are actually worth every penny. Starting with the ones taking your money. Number 5. Jameson Flavored Line. Jameson Original is a perfectly fine everyday Irish whiskey. Nobody is arguing that. But somewhere along the way, somebody in a boardroom decided what Jameson really needed was orange flavoring and cold brew coffee. Jameson Orange and Jameson Cold Brew bottles sit on the shelf around $22 to $25, which sounds reasonable until you realize what you are actually buying. These are flavored whiskey products, not whiskey. The orange version tastes like someone poured a capful of orange extract into a glass of whiskey and called it innovation. The cold brew version is sweet enough to make your teeth ache. The real problem is not that these exist. Flavored spirits have their place. The problem is that they sit on the Irish whiskey shelf next to real Irish whiskey, and newer drinkers grab them thinking they are exploring the category. They are not. They are drinking a cocktail ingredient disguised as a standalone product. For the same $25, you could buy a bottle of Jameson Black Barrel that will actually teach you what good Irish whiskey tastes like. Skip the gimmicks. Number 4. The Sexton. Let's talk about that bottle for a second. Dark hexagonal glass inspired by the Giant's Causeway, a skull wearing a top hat on the label. The words single malt printed prominently on the front. Everything about the Sexton's packaging screams premium and collectible. Then you pour it. The Sexton is a no-age statement single malt from Bushmills, aged about 4 years in Oloroso cherry casks and bottled at 40%. At $25, that would be a decent deal. But the Sexton's price has crept up to $35 and even $42 in many markets. At that price, you are in green spot territory. You are in Writer's Tears territory, and the Sexton cannot compete with either of those. The liquid is pleasant enough, with light fruit and some cherry sweetness, but it lacks the depth you expect when you are paying single malt prices. You are paying for that fancy hexagonal glass, not what is inside it. The packaging costs more than the maturation time. The bottle is the product. Number 3. Roe & Co. Here is a masterclass in corporate whiskey marketing. In the 1800s, George Roe ran the largest whiskey distillery in Ireland, right next door to the Guinness Brewery in Dublin. His whiskey was legendary. Then, Prohibition destroyed the Irish whiskey industry, and the Roe name faded into history. Fast forward to 2017, Diageo, one of the biggest alcohol corporations on earth, decides to resurrect the Roe name and slap it on a brand new blended Irish whiskey. They built a shiny distillery inside the old Guinness power station and launched Roe & Co. as a premium blend at $35 to $40. The original blend was sourced from other distilleries, and while their own distillery has been running since 2019, the flagship remains a blend of malt and grain aged in bourbon casks. It is bottled at 45%, not chill filtered, and marketed as crafted by bartenders for bartenders. The result tastes fine. Banana, vanilla, some baking spice. But fine is not what you are paying for at $35. At that price, Powers Gold Label gives you 70% pot still whiskey with 200 years of actual heritage. The history on the label is real. The whiskey inside does not live up to it. Number 2. Slane Triple Casked. Slane is what happens when Brown-Forman, The company behind Jack Daniel's and Woodford Reserve decides it wants a piece of the Irish whiskey market. They partnered with the Cunningham family, who owns Slane Castle about 30 minutes north of Dublin, and built a $50 million distillery on the castle grounds. Beautiful story. The whiskey itself is a blend of malt and grain with no age statement. Matured in 3 different cask types: virgin oak, seasoned American whiskey barrels that almost certainly held Jack Daniel's, and Oloroso cherry casks. At about $30, it is not offensively priced. But here is what bothers me. Slane leans hard on the castle, the heritage, the triple cask innovation story. What it does not tell you is that the whiskey is young, likely just 3 to 4 years old, blended from sourced stock, and bottled at a bare minimum 40%. The virgin oak and American whiskey casks push it toward tasting like a bourbon, wearing an Irish accent. If you want a smooth, sweet, easy-drinking Irish blend, there are better options at the same price that actually taste like Irish whiskey. Slane is spending its budget on the castle tour, not the liquid. The stone walls photograph beautifully. The whiskey tastes like marketing. Number 1. Proper No. 12. If there is a poster child for celebrity whiskey tax, this is it. Proper No. 12 was launched by Conor McGregor as his personal Irish whiskey brand. The marketing was everywhere. McGregor's face on billboards, sponsoring UFC events, social media campaigns targeting anyone who had ever thrown an air punch after watching a fight. The whiskey is a blend of grain and single malt, sourced from the Bushmills distillery in Northern Ireland. It is aged a minimum of 3 years in former bourbon barrels and bottled at 40%. Priced between $25 and $30, it sits alongside bottles like Tullamore Dew and Standard Bushmills, which would be fine, except that both of those are more interesting to drink. Multiple reviewers describe Proper No. 12 as thin, lacking character, cloyingly sweet, and essentially indistinguishable from the cheapest basic Irish blends on the shelf. One respected whiskey critic called it unremarkable and ordinary in exactly the way you would expect a celebrity boxer's whiskey to be. The sweetness is described as artificial, almost like diet soda. You are not buying whiskey at a premium. You are buying a bottle-shaped endorsement deal. Proximo Spirits actually dropped McGregor from the brand at the end of 2024, and the company is now trying to move upmarket with a 1-3-year-old single malt expression. Whether that redeems the brand remains to be seen, but the flagship bottle sitting on shelves right now is the definition of paying for a famous name instead of quality liquid. The fighter's name was worth more than the whiskey. 5 brands engineered around marketing, celebrity endorsements, and heritage storytelling rather than actual whiskey quality. Flavored gimmicks, young sourced stock, overpriced bottles with fancy packaging, corporate resurrections of dead brands, celebrity boxer cash grabs. 3 brands asked a different question entirely. What if we just made genuinely good whiskey and let it speak for itself? Number 3. The Busker Single Malt. The Busker comes from Royal Oak Distillery in County Carlow, and it has been building a serious following over the past few years. The single malt expression is matured in a combination of ex-bourbon and ex-sherry casks, and it punches well above its $25 to $30 price tag. You get stewed fruit, dark chocolate, toasted malt, and a finish with just enough spice to keep things interesting. The Busker Single Malt delivers the kind of complexity you normally have to spend $50 to find. It is not the prettiest bottle on the shelf, but pour it blind next to whiskeys costing twice as much, and it holds its own every time. No celebrity endorsement, no castle story, no hexagonal bottle, just good whiskey made well and priced fairly. The distillery lets the liquid do the talking. This is what happens when you spend your budget on cask selection and maturation instead of marketing. Number 2. Teeling Small Batch. The Teeling Whiskey Distillery was the first new distillery to open in Dublin in over 125 years when it launched in 2015. Their small batch expression is a blend of malt and grain whiskeys initially aged in ex-bourbon barrels, then finished in ex-rum barrels from Central America. That rum cask finish gives it something special. Vanilla, tropical fruit, brown sugar, and a warmth that lingers without any harshness. It is bottled at 46% and typically sits around $30 to $35. What makes Teeling Small Batch impressive is the extra effort, the higher proof, the rum cask finish, the non-chill filtered process. At this price point, most brands bottle at 40%. Call it a day and let the marketing department handle the rest. Teeling actually puts the money into the liquid. The bottle is simple. The whiskey is complex. That is the right balance. Number 1. Powers Gold Label. If there is one bottle on this entire list that deserves a permanent spot on your shelf, it is this one. Powers Gold Label has been produced since 1791. It is one of the oldest whiskey brands in Ireland, and for decades it was the best-selling whiskey in the country. Today it flies under the radar because Powers does not spend millions on influencer campaigns or design bottles that look like they belong in a museum. What Powers Gold Label does instead is give you a blend of 70% pot still whiskey and 30% grain whiskey at around $25 to $30. That pot still ratio is remarkable at this price. Pot still whiskey is what makes Irish whiskey unique. It uses a combination of malted and unmalted barley, and it delivers a spicy, creamy, full-bodied character you cannot get from any other style of whiskey in the world. Powers Gold Label tastes like honeycomb, white pepper, cinnamon, fresh bread, and orchard fruit. It has weight and texture that most $30 and $40 Irish whiskeys cannot match. The finish is warm, spicy, and satisfying. This is not a sipper you need to dress up with ice or ginger ale. It is genuinely delicious, neat. At $25 to $30, Powers Gold Label is the most undervalued bottle in Irish whiskey, and arguably one of the best value whiskeys on the planet. If you buy one bottle from this list, make it this one. The brand has been making the same whiskey the same way for over 200 years because they got it right and never felt the need to reinvent it.